Okay, so welcome to the first webinar for the Audience Outlook Monitor in 2022. I'm Lena Stein, a Research Associate here at the Australia Council for the Arts, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that I'm joining you today from, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I would also just like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the many nations across Australia that we're all tuning in from today, and to all First Nations colleagues online as well. So many of you would be familiar with the Audience Outlook Monitor, but if not, this tracking study has been capturing and monitoring audience insights since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, guiding strategic planning and programming for the arts and cultural sector across multiple years, lockdowns and variants. So we're thrilled to be able to continue the Outlook Monitor in 2022 in partnership with Patternmakers and Wolf Brown research agencies, as well as our state and territory partners. It's so important to continue to have our eyes and ears on audience behaviour and sentiment as we enter this new and uncharted phase of the pandemic. So the data for the March 2022 phase was released yesterday, which is the 7th phase in this study. And there are some fantastic insights that I won't spoil. I'll let our co-hosts dive deeper into those and discuss those. But there's some really encouraging news for audience attendance and confidence, as well as some key considerations as well. So while acknowledging that it's still not smooth sailing, this new data does an excellent job of giving greater clarity and a clearer picture of what's important to audiences, what they're concerned about and what they're looking forward to. So to discuss the latest insights and data, we have, as always, the fabulous Tandi Palmer Williams, Managing Director of Patternmakers, and Andy Donovan, the equally fabulous Andy Donovan, Director of Multi-Year Investment at the Australia Council for the Arts. And thank you to all of you for taking time out of your day to join us for this discussion. Of course, please drop into the chat to introduce yourselves, tell us where you're tuning in from, or any thoughts or comments that you have, and any questions as well in the Q&A box. And Tandi and Andy will get to as many as possible during the discussion today. I'd also like to thank and welcome our Auslan interpreters, Dana and Georgia. Thanks for being here. And with that, I will pass it over to Tandi. Thank you.
Thanks, Lena. Hi, everyone. It's great to be back with you for our first look at the data for 2022. I am beaming in from Bundjalung country today, and we've had a bit of a wild ride lately with the floods up here in northern New South Wales. So, yeah, it's been a crazy time. And really looking forward to just a pause from, the rush of every day to just be in this webinar with you and talking about audiences for an hour. Andy, how are you? Good to see you.
I'm good, thank you. I'm doing a bit of ISO at the moment until I get a test back. So that's kind of how we live these days. But I'm feeling okay. So I'm hoping that it'll be a negative.
Okay.
But otherwise good and still very busy. And I know a lot of the companies that we're working with out there are still very busy, sort of adjusting to this new normal and working out what is possible, what isn't possible, what they need to think about changing, and what settings they should be sort of thinking about, I guess, going forward over the next towards the end of this year and obviously in 2023 as well.
Absolutely. I think, when I looked at the data that's come in, just over a week ago now, I was sort of thinking, I think this gives us the best look yet at what we can expect in the medium term. In terms of trends, we're starting to see things settle down a bit in terms of where audiences are at and a little bit less fluctuation. So I think that gives a bit of a more stable basis for outlook. The challenges aren't going away. So I think at least knowing, what we're facing, I think is a good start. And that's our job really, is to provide you all with a really good look at audiences. And we have almost 9,000 respondents to this phase, which is amazing. You know, there's so few studies out there in our sector that reached quite so many people. And I was just thinking the other day, isn't it amazing that almost 9,000 audience members give us their opinion every few months on this? It's just an amazing study. And thank you so much to all our participating organisations. We have around 100 organisations participating this round, which is absolutely fabulous. And my team, along with the Wolf Brown team, are just, always, it's such an honour and a privilege to work in this way with you and continue supporting you. So thank you so much for supporting the study, and for all of you out there who've been writing those campaigns. So for those who don't know how the study works, is we set up a survey, and our 100 participating organisations all send the same survey to a random sample of their past attendees, and then all of that data is aggregated into a dashboard and made available to you for free, thanks to all the partners. So the Australia Council and the state arts agencies around the country all support the study so that we can all share in the same insights and really pool our resources to make sure that we've got really good quality insights. So just a reminder that we're talking about past attendees at events like live performances, museums and galleries, festivals, things like that. So they had to have attended an event from one of our participating organisations in the past I think 4 years now. So that's who we're hearing from. It's not the general population, but I just wanted to give that little reminder. And if you do want any information about the study, one of my colleagues will post a link in the chat for you, so we can send you off to find and learn more about that. Can I hear from you? I'd love to know who's out there. Can you pop your name in the chat so I can say hello? And if you want to share what country you're beaming in from, I'd love to hear from you. A warm welcome to all our partners. Alan Brown from Wolf Brown is here with us today. Hello, Alan. Lovely to have you, and we're looking forward to your insights and great questions that always come up in terms of the Australian situation. I think one of the benefits that we have of this study is just the amazing partnership with our US collaborators at Wolf Brown and all the organisations in the US and other jurisdictions who continue to roll out the study. So we have some insights in terms of how things are moving on in the US as well, and we'll hopefully get to some of that today. So in the chat, good morning. It's so great to hear from you. Hi, Julia. Hi, Myrna. Hi, Heath, Dylan, Alan. Oh, so great to have you all here, and lovely to know the countries that you're all beaming in from. Daniela, Rebecca, hi, Erica. Awesome. So I'm going to share some slides and get right into it. And I know you have your finger on the pulse as always. So I'm looking forward to hearing your reflections.
No worries.
So the National Snapshot came out last week. You can download that. And we try and write a 3-page, very short and sweet summary. So if you're really short of time, you can always just have a look at that and join us on socials if you want just those key headlines as well. But the headlines for you are that basically in terms of risk tolerance, and this is a key measure that we've been tracking since the beginning, is basically when it comes down to it, how ready are people to attend? And we know that 6 in 10 say that they're ready to attend whenever permitted. So that's our relaxed and ready group. 3 in 10 people, 3 or 4 in 10, are a little bit more risk averse. They say they'll only attend when the risk is minimal. And so they're using a bit more discretion around what they'll do and what they won't do. It's not to say they won't attend, but they are a bit more selective and generally opting for those lower risk kind of settings. And then we've got our proportion who say that they won't accept any level of risk. And they're generally staying home right now, being very cautious about social events, cultural events of all kinds, and are going to wait it out and prefer to engage generally online. So we'll get to that in a moment, but just covering basically what this chart shows is you can see all the lines kind of starting to diverge in last year with the Delta outbreak, and we had some states in lockdown, some not. Again, with Omicron, we've seen that situation fluctuate a bit, but I think we're all kind of converging, all the states' situation, as we sort of get those national guidelines in place and as borders come down, we're starting to see more consistency from state to state. The exception, as you will not be surprised by, is the yellow line. You'll see it goes up in November. WA was at peak attendance in November and is now on a bit of a downward trajectory, obviously, as they've opened the border now and cases are starting to rise there into the thousands for the first time ever. So that's kind of like a brave new world for WA, and welcome to the party. But I think it's a good thing in terms of us having a bit more consistency for decision making. We'll start to see, more touring, I think, as being possible and those kinds of things. So I think it's a good thing. What we're seeing, though, is for those states that were affected by outbreaks like New South Wales, Victoria, ACT, readiness is kind of on the up, whereas in those states that previously had, closed borders, readiness is slightly on the down, but I think we'll all meet in the middle. Now, in terms of comfort, the good news story is that cultural venues continue to be seen as safer places than many common public activities, like using public transport and going to the gym. So that's a good thing. So for instance, top of the list in terms of the proportion of national audiences that are very comfortable in these settings. There's also a proportion that say they're sort of somewhat comfortable, and then there's not comfortable, but here we're showing very comfortable. So outdoor event with fixed seating, museums and galleries. Then comes eating in the local restaurant. Then we've got community art spaces, large theatres and concert halls, going to the cinemas, and then we get to outdoor events without fixed seating. And then you'll see down the list things like public transport, going to the gym, flying domestically. So we've still got only a minority of Australian audiences who feel very comfortable flying domestically right now. And that's the measure that we're going to need to see shift if cultural tourism is going to recover. So that's still a little bit of a way off. And we'll cover a bit more about that a little later on. But amongst our sample of our kind of arts and cultural audiences, going to a live music or comedy club feels a little bit less comfortable to them, and using hands-on exhibits, again, people are still warming up to that idea of getting physical at events, and that's a key thing that we want to try and build back, particularly for kids and interactives at events and museums. I think it will be great to see confidence build with that in future. Hopefully it will. So they're the kind of hypothetical ways that audiences feel. When we ask people, have you actually attended in the last 2 weeks? What we heard is that 7 in 10 say that they have done something. They've done a cultural activity of some kind, whether that's, dropping in at the local gallery, going to a film, going to a performance. So I think it's a really strong result. A lot of people are getting back out there, and it's amazing to see events and venues filling up again. So 7 in 10 are going to something, and most of those are people in our ready to attend whenever permitted category. They're the most likely to be getting out, although not all of them are in the last fortnight, obviously. And then some people in our lower risk tolerance category are also getting out there in lower risk settings. So I think it's a great result, 7 in 10 nationally. And what we see is that's pretty much on par with what we had before Delta. So this time last year, was it? Am I getting the timing right on that, Andy? So we kind of have recovered now to that pre-Delta level. And so we've seen that kind of Omicron, Delta and Omicron have been like a 3-4 month challenge. And then we're kind of recovering back to what we think is kind of, pandemic normal kind of thing. So yes, we might have new variants. We're grappling with the Omicron version 2 at the moment, and we might see new variants. I think it's reasonable to expect they could, look the same in terms of a 3 or 4 month setback. Who knows? Each one could have its own unique characteristics and twists. And we've got to kind of be a little bit ready for those in terms of our contingency planning and risk management. As always, I don't think we can take the foot off the pedal with those. But I think we have a normal that we can get a little bit used to, which is that 7 in 10 past audiences are getting back to something, to a cultural event of some kind. In terms of the outlook for the future, we know that even more of of a higher proportion of our audiences, so 4 out of 5 are making plans to attend in future. And forgive this very red and colourful chart. Basically, I'll tell you what it means is that we're seeing a return to that kind of last minute decision making. So when we were in lockdown in, say, New South Wales and Victoria last year, we started to see people planning with a longer horizon because they were planning for like when lockdown ends, and they were feeling hopeful about kind of summer at that point. So we saw decision making push outward again, but now it's returned to, say, the most common timeline that people are planning is basically, a week to a month ahead kind of thing. So we're seeing people making decisions for, like, say, next weekend or the weekend after at the moment. So I think that's probably here to stay. That last minute decision making is going to hang around a bit longer. People still feel a little bit cautious about planning too far out, although some are very committed to doing that. It's not everyone. In terms of spending, I think this is one of the best news pieces of the story this time. So there are signs that economic recovery are, positive signs for economic recovery. So audiences are reporting the highest spending levels since the pandemic basically started. So you'll see in the dark green, right up at the top, we've got March, now, 38% spent more than $100. So this is a really good sign. It's even higher than it was this time last year. So I think, we talked in previous webinars about how Australians generally as a group have been saving through the pandemic, and the majority of Australians are actually financially better off. Some are worse off. And we know that, for instance, there's many independent practitioners in our own sector who are worse off. But generally Australians have been saving and are in a relatively good financial position, and so some of those people are ready to spend and looking for things to indulge on. So I think that's a good sign. However, knowing what we know about how how ready people feel and the proportion getting out there, full economic recovery is still a long way off, I'm going to say. So it's going to be that full economic recovery is not going to happen in the foreseeable future, I'd say. So when we ask people, what factors, if any, are preventing you from attending as you used to in the past, pre-pandemic, this is what people say. So 52% still say the risk of contracting or transmitting the virus is inhibiting them to some extent. 43% say the risk of being a close contact. And we've seen in the press in the last few days, pushes from, Scott Morrison et al. To change the close contact laws to loosen them a bit so that family members or household contacts of a COVID case, may not have to isolate. And there's a strong kind of pushback, as far as I can see, from the public health officials saying that that's not a good idea. So who knows what we'll expect in the next few months there. We could see that loosened a little bit as we move past the peak. Let's wait and see. But right now, that's still a concern for 43% of audiences. And then 32% are still a bit inhibited by the risk of future lockdowns or cancelled events. So that's still playing on people's minds. So, whilst things are looking up, we're seeing more activity, more spending, more people making plans. All those things are moving in the right direction. I think we still need to expect that we're not going to see a return to the audiences that we had in the past for the foreseeable future. We've got some people who, Wolf Brown in the US, I think you call them kind of long-term non-returners. And some of those really want to engage online and want that to very much continue. So I think it's wise for us to expect and plan for the market to be spread like this for at least the time being. But Alan, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the US if you've got something to offer in terms of what you're advising your cohort. So here's some of what we hear from audiences. One person said, I think it's important that restrictions are lifted so the arts can get back to full houses. People need to make their own decisions to feel comfortable. I will likely continue to wear masks at crowded events. Another person said, I'm triple vaxxed, but I would hate to pass it on to someone else. One of our daughters is a health worker and one has a compromised immune system. The thought of people not caring if they pass the virus on is very upsetting to me. So I think what we see in the data is just that huge diversity of opinions right now. Every person, every family, every household seems to have their own situation, whether that's someone who's immunocompromised, someone who's a health worker, someone who needs to look after someone else. And so everyone's kind of making their own decisions, and we see the full range of opinions out there. And through this webinar, we'll share with you some of those qualitative comments so you can get a feel for the richness of the data and the range of things that are happening. But together we'll try and make sense of, what it means overall. And at the end, I'll share some kind of key takeaways, which I think kind of wrap it all up for you. But Andy, I'd love to know what you're making of this so far. What do you think?
Look, I think what we're seeing in these results is kind of what we're seeing in the projections of some of the companies that we are supporting. I think I'm sensing there's probably a level of greater caution in terms of projections this year that companies are making around audiences, probably taking into account that although things are sort of restrictions are kind of lifting, there's just, I think the risk profile for a lot of companies is still in the back of their minds in terms of audience. So I do think while there's some positives in there, I still think there's quite a bit of caution for companies in terms of how they're approaching their projections around audience. I've just noticed a comment from Christine about the difference between from March 21 to the results today as to whether they really are statistically significant. It seems similar and looks like things haven't changed much in the full year, which is concerning. And I think there's some truth in that, really. I think there's still a level of caution, and I think the difficulty that companies are having in planning is around that uncertainty. Oh, I think you're on mute, Tandi.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, so I think it's wise to be cautious. We certainly are proponents of kind of cautious optimism at Patternmakers. I think we need to stay positive and be, have that active hope for the future. But also be really cautious, and particularly in kind of live performance, I would be being conservative. I think that's the setting that people have taken slightly longer to warm up to in terms of their comfort levels. And that's where we when the numbers rise again, we start to see attendances drop off in terms of particularly at concerts, in large concert halls, those kinds of things. So I think for museums and galleries, it's a little bit different. That tends to top the list in terms of most people feel comfortable there, and outbreaks haven't affected comfort as much in those areas. And certainly the outdoor events over summer have, we've seen in our cover images, thanks to the team at Adelaide Fringe Festival, where, I think there are some real kind of successes out there at the moment, relatively speaking. And, it's not rocket science to work out, what's behind that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I still think it's really important that people see that level of COVID safety, I suppose, sort of up front when they're going to venues, so they can see the mask wearing, they can see the cleaning, that sort of thing, and I think that's reflected in some of the data too, isn't it, Tandi, about where people feel comfortable about some of the measures that venues are putting in place.
Yes, that's right. So we'll move on now, I think, to talk about some of these. So COVID safety, obviously the COVID safety situation is evolving. We've seen some of the restrictions relaxed over the last few months, and the measures that we tested this month look a little bit different, but what we're seeing is that proof of vaccination, so requiring that at entry, is still the number one thing that we can do in our venues and events to encourage audiences to attend. So we've got much more to gain by doing that than we have to lose in terms of our audiences, mainly because our audience is so very much leading the way in terms of vaccination relative to the general population. And I'll cover those stats in a moment. But so 70% say that they find that encouraging, and only 11% find it kind of discouraging. So you'll see we've got a lot more to gain than to lose there. Masks still come into play, and some audiences really appreciate mandatory mask requirements, particularly where cases are rising again. So in some settings, they are definitely, should be on the table, I think. Other settings, I think they can be relaxed. And some people do find them encouraging. So I think it's right to think about, what's your particular setting and what's right for your audience. But I'd definitely be keeping masks on the table, even if the government, policy of the day is that they're not mandatory. Certain settings and certain audiences, they are very powerful. Capacity limitations. So if you're looking at reduced capacity anyway, in terms of demand, I think it's wise to let audiences know that. So if you can say this event's going to be capped at 50% or 75%, and that can act as, you can spur some audiences on. Some do find it encouraging still. So they're the top three. Check-ins, not so much. We've seen that really fall away, just in terms of the viability of contact tracing now. Doesn't really matter to people. So we can kind of put that one aside in some ways in terms of our thinking. And masks for children have always been a bit divisive in terms of, is that appropriate and reasonable? And so, yeah, masks for age 12 plus seems to be the sweet spot for those audiences who do want them. When we ask people, how would you feel about proof of vaccination or a negative test from a rapid antigen test, we see the proportion of audiences who find that encouraging drop right back. So around, 25, 30% of audiences aren't ready to go to events where unvaccinated people can attend simply by showing a negative test result. I know that's been a policy overseas that seems to have gained popularity in some areas. Right now, Australian arts audiences still very much want that proof of vaccine requirement there, and that's going to reassure the biggest number of people. So I'll share some of the comments here. So my deal breakers are not checking vaccination, not checking vaccination status, not wearing masks. While I try to maintain distance wherever possible, I do not support capacity limits for concerts, as performing arts organisations really need income. So you can see a lot of audiences are thinking about the viability of the sector, and they get it. It's really interesting. It's been, there's so much more awareness now of the situation and the economics of the arts sector. And then another person said, I personally will use a mask if I'm worried, but I don't now expect everyone to use one. I think 100% capacity is fine. I'm still undecided about checking if everyone is vaccinated before entering the theatre. Part of me thinks that we should go back to total normality. Still analysing this. So let's watch this space. In terms of vaccination, arts audiences continue to lead the way in terms of the proportion who've had 3 shots is now right up there, 87%. Some have even had 4. So arts audiences as a group continue to be more likely than the general population to be vaccinated. In terms of whether people think vaccination is going to kind of allow us to get back to normal, we're still a bit divided on that. And this is a question that the wording of this question, I think we all thought that this was normal activities we're going to resume. But I think now more and more we're sort of accepting we're in a bit of a new normal, aren't we? And the likelihood of things going back to how they were before is, it's pretty slim. So here's how people are divided. 38% are very confident that things will get back to normal within a year. 53% are somewhat confident and 9% are not at all confident. So this situation is a little bit worse than it was in November. And so we've got now the Omicron factor, and, we now know that vaccines are effective in some ways, but not in terms of preventing transmission as much. But we are still a bit more optimistic than we were in, mid-lockdown 2021. So I think as a group overall, we're sort of adjusting, I guess, to a new normal. And we will all want to be optimistic about the future, but I think more and more we are facing the reality that we're in the new normal already, and let's just find a way to carry on. I think, Andy, we were talking about, well, if is this the new normal, then how? And we're all so tired. I'd love to know how you in your organisations, and Andy, what's happening at the Australia Council in terms of how you're looking after yourselves and each other. Do you see what I see in terms of the fatigue that we're all facing, and what are the solutions?
Well, I I don't know that there are easy solutions. We certainly see the fatigue across the companies because, obviously there's been the pandemic and the scheduling and rescheduling and reprogramming, postponing, remounting works that have happened across the last couple of years, and throw into that now the mix with the weather events in Queensland and northern New South Wales and the challenges surrounding that. I think there is a general level of fatigue out there, but I'd also think there is an acknowledgement that things aren't going to go back to pre-COVID very quickly, and I think there's an understanding that companies are going to have to work through what that means and what some of those mitigating strategies are, which do add cost to the business operations of the companies, how they're going to be sustainable with that additional cost, and some of the additional complexity that they need to think about in terms of presenting work. And that can be from, needing to increase the number of understudies to mitigate against a company of performers, one of the performers getting sick, or indeed with crews, even sort of having swing crews that need to be available to replace other crews if some of them those crews get affected by COVID. So all of those sorts of things obviously add additional cost. Then there's the cost of also making the audience feel safe through the different COVID measures that you put in the front of house as well. Not to mention the issues around front of house staff and their potential exposure too. So I think all of those things really do add up to a new normal, and are real challenges for companies to think about in terms of cost and sort of the ongoing sustainability of presenting work. So I do think it is a new normal, and I think it's a new operating mode that companies are going to find themselves in for the foreseeable future.
Thanks, Andy. It's good to know that we're not the only ones who feel the fatigue is real. What are you doing? I'd love to know, for those who are participating today, are there things that you personally are doing? What things is your organisation experimenting with, if you work in one? I almost think, yes, these things do come at a cost, but is the cost of not doing it greater, or the risk of not doing it greater? So
absolutely.
It's almost like we have to do it because I think some of these things are a really good thing in terms of looking at well-being, which was a problem before the pandemic already. So hopefully, these will be the silver linings, so that we can find the new ways of working and the new models through this time. It's going to put us in a good stead long term.
I think it's reassuring to hear those two comments earlier from audiences saying they understand the need to get back to 100%, because I think all of the companies that particularly rely on box office also see that as a very great need, the sustainability of having 75% capacity, for example, is really tricky for some companies. And so that level of comfort, if we can get that level of comfort for audiences, that they feel okay being in a packed house, that's terrific.
All right, let's move on. So in terms of the data, I wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the changes that we're seeing in terms of attendance patterns. So we know a little bit about the proportion of the audience base that are likely to attend, that are kind of in the market. Patterns are going to be looking a little bit different. So what we asked people, and this came up through some of the suggestions from participating organisations and the Australia Council, is looking at, has there been any change to your preferred attendance times in light of COVID-19? So 8 in 10 said no, 12 said yes, 12%, sorry, and 9% said not sure. And when we asked people to explain what they meant, we heard things like, working from home and not in the city, and therefore our preferred night is now Friday. Earlier, we did not care which night. Another person said they prefer early rather than late shows, as people at that time may be taking more risk with behaviour. And another person said, I prefer off-peak times as I'm avoiding public transport and wouldn't drive during peak time to attend an event due to the massive increase in traffic congestion in Sydney. So we're seeing this kind of, I think we need to bear in mind that for 8 and 10, they're still doing, having the patterns that they used to, or they think so. But for a proportion of the market, we're seeing this kind of interrelationship of, the risks of transmission with the broader kind of lifestyle trends and changes that we're seeing. So more people working from home, people tending, having moved out of the inner metropolitan areas to outer suburbs or regional areas, and people's concerns around public transport, traffic, parking. So they're all kind of interrelated, but I think it's a trend just to watch out and think about in terms of, our 8 p.m, Wednesday night performances still popular. I think it'll be different depending on where you're situated and your particular audience profile, but something to bear in mind is that we're seeing some trends, and these could hang around, I think, for some time. So good to think about the days and times that you're programming to. I wanted to talk about tourism, and I mentioned that the proportion of audiences that feel very comfortable flying on a domestic airline is about 3 in 10 right now. What we asked people in relation to their making plans for the future, we asked them, were those plans for attending a venue event in your local area or outside your local area, but within your state and territory, in another state, territory, or another country? And this is the balance that we heard about. So 70% of those making plans are doing so for events in their local area. 52% are making plans to attend events outside their local area, but within their state. And 13% are making plans for outside their state. So I think what this says to us is cultural tourism is, more people are thinking about travel, and it's great to see that so many people are making plans to get out of their local area, but mostly that's going to be intrastate travel as opposed to interstate travel. So I think in relation to some of the tourism forecasts that we've seen, it's looking like the tourism authorities are predicting domestic travel to rebuild by next financial year or the one after in Victoria. It might take a little bit longer. And that, people's priorities in terms of travel right now are a little bit different to usual. So people are prioritizing catching up with friends and family, the great outdoors, nature and wildlife, those kinds of things, and things that are safe and secure. So our travel arrangements are going to be looking a little bit different right now. So I think in terms of interstate travel, if that's relevant to you, it's just obviously having, some good reality checks around those forecasts. But I think some real potential around intrastate travel for us to focus on. There's lots to digest on this slide, but in the past, we've noticed why people are preferring local events, just because they want to support local, but they also see local as less risky in terms of COVID, less risky in terms of cancellations. They want to be able to get excited about something and look forward to something, and for them to feel confident it's actually going to go ahead and that they're spending wisely as well. So patterns are similar across the country. Obviously, people in the ACT are a little bit more likely to be thinking interstate, but in most other places, it's relatively similar. Queensland and WA are still the most likely to be thinking local. And in terms of content, these are some of the measures that we've been tracking since the early days of the pandemic. And I just wanted to report the latest to you, which is that, most audiences, 90% still say they want to see the same kinds of events and experiences as before. I think that's a vote of confidence in, the audience, the artists and the organisations that they love, and they trust them to do what's good. There is a bit of a trend towards more lighthearted things that has fallen back a bit since the kind of initial lockdown. When lockdown was starting to ease in November, we saw people really wanting to be lighthearted again, but that's dropped back a little bit, but still 40% saying they're more into lighthearted at the moment. And works that help make sense of the pandemic, less so. There's a bit of pandemic fatigue out there that's hanging around, but it's not to say that they don't want to hear about the big issues. In fact, quite the opposite. So I'll share a bit more some of the comments from audiences. So thank you for everything you do for our community, giving hope and beauty, expressing current concerns, making us think. Another one said, hang in there, you're incredibly valued. Don't be afraid to keep asking for donations. We care and want you and your artists to survive this. Another person said, I'm glad to finally be able to attend events I'd booked 2 years ago. It's been great to see that the artists are still passionate about their must have been such a demoralizing time over the past 2 years. Thank you for pushing on. So we see dozens and dozens, hundreds of comments like this. So I just think there's such a feeling of support out there for your work right now, and many, many audience members wanting to find ways to support you to keep going. We've talked about the themes and the ways that audiences see arts and culture playing a role in recovery, and these are very, very much still relevant in terms of placemaking. Connections, a really big one, escapism, healing, transformation and remodeling. So I'll share a couple of comments as we finish up on those, but basically I just wanted to also give you a little sneak peek at digital. So we've got a digital fact sheet coming out in the next few weeks, so stay tuned for that. But just to dangle a little bit of the latest findings, we've seen a slight drop back in digital engagement, but not as much as we would have thought. So we're still seeing, some good, I think it's 40%, 42% see a small role for digital in their life. Sorry, I'm getting those mixed up. 26% see a substantial role for digital in their life in future. 47% see a small role. So that's still looking really good. And in fact, settling down a bit after last year, some fluctuations there. So I think a good sign that digital is still going to be an important part of how we present and engage with audiences. A couple of audience comments. So one thing about COVID is that the lockdowns were a great leveler. Generally speaking, you have to have a reasonable income to afford to go to live performances. The pandemic has taught us that the digital world can bring so much more into our homes, including artistic performances. And another said, please continue to offer cultural event options online. The pandemic has highlighted what life was like for many vulnerable people, e.g. elderly and disabled, every day of their lives before the pandemic hit. So if they can continue to access events online, even when life returns to normal for everyone else, that would be a very positive thing. All right, so my key takeaways, and Andy, I'd love to hear your reflections on those. So as we talked about, 7 in 10 people are attending again, but we're still a way off full economic recovery, and we will be for the foreseeable future. COVID safety measures are still incredibly powerful for audiences, with a priority on proof of vaccination and, in some cases, masks. Patterns of attendance are going to look a little bit different this year. So we talked about some of those trends to watch out for. So what we've seen over the last few months is that, outdoor, local flavour, kind of weekend events have, gone relatively well. And so as we go into winter, we could take a little bit of a hit, in terms of we might not see those same levels continue at quite the same level. We'll see. We're hoping to do another pulse check on this mid-year, but we'll wait and see what happens as the transmission conditions change. I think just picking up on one of the questions that Heath shared in the Q&A, so re-audience spending. Other than COVID, what are your thoughts on spending in the next few months around federal election, Ukraine impact, floods? Yeah, I think there's quite a lot going on right now. So there's a lot that people are sort of worried about and talking about. I think winter might be a little bit more challenging than summer, but hopefully we'll be past the Omicron peak by Easter. So really, I think it depends on, what the virus numbers do, how some of these issues change. I think winter, let's see. I think summer seems to be a really special time in the pandemic so far, where we're seeing kind of the best results, but just so many unknowns. So yeah, I think it's wise to be cautiously optimistic, as always. So more people are starting to make plans to travel to cultural events, but the most potent segments to target right now are the local and intrastate. Digital has climbed just slightly, but not as much as we have predicted. It will have a firm place, particularly courses, workshops, and video of all kinds coming top of the list. They seem to have the best staying power. And audiences see an important role for the arts in recovery, particularly for connection and in relation to the big issues we're facing right now. And they want the arts to lead by example, so prioritising inclusion and working better and differently. So yeah, I just wanted to say keep up the great work. I think there's so much in this data that supports everything that you're doing. So I hope that you can find the ways to look after yourselves and your teams and keep going. I think the innovations that we're seeing, I just love the creativity, and I think we can't take the brakes off there. I'd love to see us doing even more, and I know there's a lot in the works that we're going to see coming online through the next little while. Andy, what are your thoughts before we finish up?
I think we may have lost Andy. I can't see him in our list of panelists anymore. Oh, he's back.
If there's any final questions from anyone, you can also contact us. I'll just share, as Andy's getting back online, we lost you there, Andy, for a second, but I'll just share, you can head to our website to access the snapshot report. There's, a one-page infographic if you just want to print out one page and share it with some colleagues or stick it up in the office. At the coffee and tea station. The dashboard is there as always via Wolf Brown's amazing dashboard tool for you to explore. And if you need any help with that, just get in touch with our team. And we're going to be coming out with some new snapshots and updates over the next few months, looking at digital participation. We're also going to have a focus on children and young people. So we've got a new team member, Elodie, who is going to be working on that. And so if you're in the business of connecting with young people and children as audience members, then stay tuned for that one. Andy, I'd love to hear just any thoughts from you on the key takeaways. I noticed there's a comment also from Daniela. How do family audiences feel attending performances? Has this changed now that children are more vaccinated? Daniela, we won't cover that today, but I've got a whole fact sheet coming your way in the next little while, so stay tuned for that one. Andy, what do you think?
Look, I think, sorry, I dropped off. I had a bit of an internet problem, so sorry, everyone. I think, so I missed some of that discussion, so sorry if I get a bit repetitive. I think the digital information is really interesting in that there's still that expectation and not a huge drop off in expectation that people will still consume things from a digital perspective, and that aligns with some of the work we'll be doing at the Australia Council over the next little while in that digital space. So that's pleasing to see, and really, I guess, indicating that we need to sort of get our heads around how that works in that kind of hybrid mode, I suppose, between live performance or live events and then online events, and what that interplay is between those two for companies. I think it's really pleasing too to talk about that idea of the role of arts in recovery, and I think that's been particularly highlighted through the support that both state governments and federal government has given to arts through the pandemic to sort of really try and use the arts to help rebuild in some ways and get people back into cities and venues and enliven spaces again through the arts. So I think that, so for me, those are the sort of the key takeouts. I think the challenges are again sort of around those issues of travel and tourism, and I think that's something that we really need to address. And I suppose trying to reiterate as much as we can to audiences that theatres and venues are COVID safe spaces, and that people needn't be overly worried about going back into those spaces to see live performance or exhibitions, because those spaces are actually well run and well managed from a COVID safe perspective.
Thanks for those insights, Andy. And I know the Australia Council has that great event on the arts in mental wellbeing this Friday as well, so that'll be a good one to follow on from this.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that's something that will be an increasing focus too, because obviously, as we talked about through this session, the fatigue that people are feeling through this pandemic, and we need the strategies for people to look after their mental health and their well-being, and also for artists, because we know that it's been a particularly difficult time for independent artists and practitioners as well, and so it's about how we can work to help those people as well.
Yeah, it's great to see this work happening, and I think, you know, from as a research company, when we were looking into the well-being impacts of the arts pre-pandemic, you know, we're finding some amazing things, but those benefits are just so much more clear right now after the pandemic and everything we've been to. It's now almost sort of like stating the obvious, isn't it? So I think we can really make a step change now in terms of advocating for that angle, and it's great to see that work progressing at the Australia Council. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. It's been great to be with you today, and thanks for the messages that you're sending through to the panelists. We will make the slides available on our website if you want them afterwards, and throw over to you, Lena. Thanks for having us again.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. So many excellent insights there. And so, yes, as Tandi mentioned earlier, there'll be some extra fact sheets, especially on digital engagement, coming up soon. So please keep your eyes peeled, as well as 2 more phases of data collection to keep that tracking going. And I'll just quickly give a bit more of information about the event on Friday that Tandi also briefly mentioned. If you haven't received our invitation in your emails, we'll be addressing the question in a panel discussion: what would it take to ensure that all Australians are living a fully contributing life, not only surviving but thriving? So this panel is part of our Arts, Creativity and Mental Wellbeing Policy Development Program. So if you're in Melbourne, you can join at the Hanson Dyer Hall in person, which is very exciting, at the University of Melbourne, and that's from 11 to 12:30 p.m. Or online. So the information should all be in the chat there. So we would love to see you. So yes, thanks so much for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
See you later. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.